The pentatonic scale is a 5-note scale that makes up the basis of a lot of rock and blues music. And it's also the perfect scale for beginner guitarists to learn. In this video, I'm going to explain a little bit about what the pentatonic scale is, show you how to play it across the entire fretboard in any key, and I'll show you some practical ways that you can use it to improve your guitar playing. Now before I start, there's a lot of music theory that can really confuse things and maybe bog us down a little bit if we dig too deep. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it really simple and straightforward and cover just what we need to know to get through this lesson. Alright, so what is a pentatonic scale? Well, penta is Greek for 5 and tonic, notes. So a pentatonic scale is just a scale made up of 5 notes. Now traditional major minor scales use 7 notes. So what we're doing is we're just removing 2 of those notes, and the 2 that we're removing are more likely to cause problems by clashing with chords that we'll be playing over. So the pentatonic scale is a lot more straightforward and easier to use when soloing, especially if you're just getting started with guitar. Now there's 5 positions for the pentatonic scale on guitar. Each position begins on the low E, starting on a different note of the scale. So if we look at the A minor pentatonic scale, for example, we've got A, C, D, E, and G. The first position starts on A, the second on C, third on D, etc. Each position goes across all 6 strings, which is why you might also see these called boxes, because the shape that you end up making kind of looks like a box. Now the great thing about these shapes is you can move them across the fretboard to play in any key, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But first let me show you the shape of all the different positions. Alright, so let's start with the first position. As I said, we're in A minor, so we're going to start the first position on A. So that's the shape of the first position, and what I'll do is I'll put all these shapes in a document and I'll link it in the description below so you can refer back to it when you're practicing at home. The second position starts on the second note of the scale, which in this case is C, and it follows the same sequence of notes, so we get the same sound that we had in first position, but we're playing it in a slightly different place. So you can see that these positions just allow us to see where all the notes are across the entire fretboard. So here's the shape of the second position. Next up, we've got the third position, which again follows the third note of the scale, so just playing it in a slightly different place. So this is the shape of the third position. Next up, we've got the fourth position, which is this. And finally, we've got the fifth position, which is this. So, as I said, these shapes can be moved around and played across the entire fretboard. And what's interesting is that, as you might know, the 12th fret is where all the notes begin to repeat themselves. So, the 13th fret here is the same as the 1st fret. It's just an octave higher. So these shapes that we just learned can be repeated down the fretboard. So, as I said, there's a couple of really cool things about the pentatonic scale. The first is, like any scale, you can use it to play in any key, but it's really, really easy once you know these shapes. So, for example, we've learned A minor. If I wanted to play in G minor, all I have to do is start shape 1 on G. And that's the G minor pentatonic. And all the shapes follow accordingly, so that would be position 2, that's position 3, and so on. What's handy about this is as you start to learn licks, which are just little phrases that you can use in solos, you can easily move them between different places by knowing which pentatonic position they're based around. So, for example, if I had a pentatonic lick based around position 1, that's in A minor. If I'm playing in G, works exactly the same, I just have to shift it to the right position. Now, it will be tricky at first moving around to different keys because all the shapes change around. But the more you familiarize yourself with the shapes and the more you practice playing in different keys, the more it will make sense and it will become like second nature. The other really cool thing about these minor pentatonic scale shapes is that you've actually just learned the major pentatonic scale as well. So each minor scale has its own relative major that has the same notes. So we've got A, C, D, E, and G. C major pentatonic has C, D, E, G, and A. Exactly the same notes, just in a slightly different order. So what that means for us is that our second position of the minor pentatonic scale will always be the relative major. Now, that might be a little bit too much music theory at this stage, and by all means, your main focus here should just be on learning those shapes. But it's just handy to know for later on down the line that the second note of the minor pentatonic scale, position 1, will always be the relative major. Alright, so the next steps that I recommend is to really familiarize yourself with those shapes just all across the fretboard, up and down, ascending, descending. Then what I would do is I would learn some licks based around the pentatonic positions, just to give them some more context. So we had that lick earlier. Just little things like that to help just give those positions a little bit more context. And it's also helpful to build up a knowledge of licks, because that will aid you in your soloing later on. And I've linked a playlist where I've put some licks together in the description below to get you started. Some of them can be a little bit challenging. If it does seem like a little bit too much, then move on to the next one. There's quite a balance of some more advanced things, but also some very, very beginner-friendly ones as well. After that, the next thing that I would do is I would learn to move away from the shapes. So these boxes up and down, I would try and learn diagonally across the fretboard. And what that does is it helps free up the fretboard. You're not confined to these boxes and, rigidly moving between them. You have a lot more fluidity, and it really helps with your guitar playing. So, for example, instead of just going in box 1, we can go moving into box 2, into box 3, into box 4, and then finishing around box 5. And as I said, by learning this, it will help free up the fretboard because you won't be relying so much on those shapes as you will knowing where the notes are. It feels a lot more organic. But as I said, that's something for the future. It's going to take a while to get there. So, get the shapes down, learn them back to front, and you're really setting yourself up for success. So that's a brief overview of the pentatonic scale. Let me know how you got on, or if you've got any questions in the comments below, and subscribe for more guitar tips. Thank you.